Well, Chappy, we've been planning this for, God, it seems like months, so we've never we've never been
Um,
able to get it to come.
yeah, to be fair, it probably was only weeks, but I think we chatted about it a few months ago. And then when you were like, hey, why don't we do this? That was only a couple of weeks ago. So it's just been a lot on.
Yeah. What
So like,
prompted it is I've known you for about 10 years now. Like, can you believe that? A decade has gone
oh,
by.
wow.
Yeah. And a lot of people wouldn't realize, that you are one of the people who really influenced me and affected my entry into the superbike school. And the story, is I like it. I've told quite a few people about it, because I failed the first attempt, and then you were my coach when we ran the level four session the next day in order to try and fix that. There was something wrong with my riding, and anyway, so it's been a 10-year journey from that point, and
Yeah, right.
I've been in the school predominantly because of a fix that you added to my riding. But the thing I wanted to know about is, the history of Chappy, where it came from. And as you know, we've spoken to Knackers and Adam Raff about his history and all that. So your history is pretty long as well. So my first question, where did this all begin? What led for you to get into superbike school and the racing and all of the things that you're doing with motorbikes?
Yeah, for sure, man. I was trying to think like how far back do we go? And
Far as you like,
probably
mate.
yeah, yeah.
Hang
So
on, you're only as old as my son. It can't be that far.
I was gonna say we've only got a couple of grey hairs, so yeah, you're looking less grey than I am. Um, And I would say like the first little seed that was planted was my father was a real great with his hands, fully dyslexic, left school when he was 13, went and became a builder by trade, a very successful builder and did a few different things. But he was real mechanical and his I remember one of his greatest cars he ever said was a Valiant VIP Valiant. Uh, and he had a V8 station wagon, and so he's always a bit of a rev head, and he'd built me a homemade go kart when I was 2 or 3 years old. Wheelbarrow wheels and real basic machine. I don't think it had brakes, sort of styles. And so I remember as a kid driving down the beach on this little go kart. And that was sort of my first introduction to some sort of thing that went well. And it sort of never really departed from there. So I was a bit of a car kid. I loved cars and did radio control cars and all that kind of fun stuff. And neighbor had a little scooter, and I remember being like, "Oh, what's going on with the scooter?" And so I bought the scooter as a bit of a bush hack is the wrong term, but we sort of rolled around. I lived next door to our primary school, so I could ride in the primary school and do laps on the grass and all that kind of stuff. And
But you're more rural then, not in the city.
yeah, so it was kind of like real small town. It was kind of where I grew up was not quite Phillip Island, but a similar sort of esque. It was an hour north of Wellington, and it's where most people had a holiday home or a holiday spot, sleepy sort of area. So, um, yeah, it was quiet. A kid could push his little scooter to the park and ride around and ride home, and people would give them a wave. People give us a wave. So, it was that kind of quiet spot. So. Yeah, and then road bikes for transportation, and it wasn't until a couple of mates started doing track days, and then we started doing track days, and then the road bikes kind of got parked, and we started getting into competing, and it was quite achievable and affordable here in New Zealand. You could race really really cheaply, and the facilities were really really good. So we had Manfield Raceway, which is was a World Superbike circuit in the late '80s, early '90s. So I had a bit of credibility there, and that was it. The bug was pretty deep by then. By the time we had track bikes, race bikes, that was what we did. We travelled the country. Me and a group of mates. There was sort of like a whole flat of us. So we had three or four of us that lived together, and the garage would have had lots of expensive machines, and the front lawn was covered in $200 cars. That they all had a tow bar so they could tow a trailer so we could go racing. Right? So that was just sort of our rite of passage as young adults, doing the racing thing. And some of us did fairly well locally, with regional championships and stuff like that. And then I met when I joined the military. I was in the Air Force. I joined that in 2007. and became really good friends with a British engineering officer who had done a bunch of track daying in England, and then had met me and sort of went, how, like, I know who you are rank wise, I know what you do for a job, I know how much money you earn, and you race like quite competitively. How can you do that? So he was astonished at how achievable it is to race in New Zealand with regards to cost.
Hmm.
And so he started racing, and then he talked about this California Superbike School. And at that time, I think the New Zealand branch, which was a business partnership between Steve Brogy and another person called Darren Sweetman, who brought California Superbike School to New Zealand. And that was when Hampton Downs, the Auckland-based complex, was built. So they tied the school to Hampton Downs and kicked it off with Suzuki's. And yeah, so the school started up there, and myself and Lee went up there and were doing track days and volunteering marshals or scrutineering and that kind of stuff. And you'd ride for half the day and work for half the day. And yeah,
What sort of age was this?
so that time, would have been mid 20s. I would have been 25, 26,
Yeah.
probably getting involved with that. So I probably raced for 3 or 4 years. I started on very small stuff. They had a two-stroke 150 single cylinder bikes here in New Zealand called an RG 150. It was two-stroke RG single cylinder, and it became a real great entry class. Pretty much stock machines, road-based tire, and you could pick them up for nothing.
Yeah,
And
two strokes, weren't they?
yeah, so they did 100 miles an hour flat out, and weighed nothing. They were all steel, so anything you bend back. And yeah, it was a really good class for getting people into it because you could just get into it so cheap. Um, so did that, and then I moved to the Formula 3 style racing, so CBR 400s, ZXR 400s. I had a very cool Suzuki RGV 250. I actually bought one of the last, what they call the VJ23, so it was the Aprilia Moto electric start Suzuki, which is pretty rare and sadly very unreliable. So
Yeah.
um, after trying that for a year, I think I swapped it for another bike once we sort of got it all up and running and moved away from that. It's a shame because it's worth a bit of money now, those old two strokes. So yeah, yeah. So I ended up with the ZXR 400, and that was kind of the steed that I chose and started to develop. And they had a really good foothold in post classic racing, so pre 1989, which it was eligible for, and Formula 3. So you'd race other 400cc4s or SV 650 twins. So that was kind of where I cut my teeth, and I did quite well regionally on the 400, and then I started tuning and modifying, and I got quite into building hot rods, and that was quite fun. So
Yeah.
but back to your original question, this gentleman, my good friend Lee Bradford, he went off and did this California Superbike School, and he had turned up and started riding a 600, a ZX6, in an entry level class. They did a clubman's class, so it didn't sort of matter what you rode. It was just an all encompassing class where you could ride anything, but it exposed you to racing in a safe way. And he was sort of mid pack. He used to run around and did okay for half the season, and then went up to this California Superbike School. Well, I'd never heard of it at all. I think I'd heard of the books, Twist of the Wrist,
Mm.
but I'd never heard of the school per se. So went and did that, did level 1 and 2, and then returned. Must have been like a Monday and a Tuesday, and then returned to race that weekend on the Saturday. And I remember he was riding ZX6 on what the race techs are now. It was a Metzler, I don't know if they called them race techs or Ren specs, or there was a treated production tire, and it was pissing with rain at Manfield. And I sort of said to him, "Hey man, do you want me to do some tire pressures? Do you want me to stop some suspension? Like it's raining." He's like, "No, no, no, it's fine. I'll just go out." And he won the first race by 10 seconds.
Wow.
What did you learn up at the school? And he's like, well, you have to go. So, yeah, I booked the
Wow.
very next school, and away I went. So, drag model 400 up to Hampton Downs and met the CSS crowd. And I think I was so arrogant. I don't know if many of the coaches know this, that I remember when they were looking for people to go and do the steering drill. That's level ones, when you're ready, come to a steering drill. I race motorbike. I don't need a steering drill. And when the quick steer drill was discussed by Steve Brogy, And I distinctly remember him saying, "So when you press on the bar," I was like, "Press on the bar? Oh, oh, is that what you do?" And yeah, it was kind of right at that point in time. I was like, "Okay, I do not know what I think I know." So it really opened my eyes then, which is, that third session on the first day,
Yeah.
how much I did not know, and yeah, and just so many of the things that you struggle with as a racer was you could put a label on it and therefore identify it and try and resolve it either with the coach or have a thought on it yourself. So um, that was my school experience, I suppose, if you will.
Wow. It was like it's interesting because it probably reinforces, or as you say, you put a label on something, but it makes you consciously aware of the things you do right that have a label, and then
Yeah,
the things that you never knew anything about that need to
100%.
change. Like it's just adds to the portfolio of things you do well. Because there's a ton of racers out there who ride like really fast, and speed almost helps them. Good throttle control comes from can come just from the fact that they go in way really fast into a corner and they're off the gas for a long time.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So with like when you went into that first session and started doing the school, um, how much when you in hindsight you look back today, how much of your ego did you have to kind of bite on, or what's the word? Like start to introduce a little bit of humility into it because I often see it, with races come along in that first session, level one, session one, and there's this kind of like, oh shit, I've got to go to kindergarten or something. And it's not that at all. It's completely different, but they bring their ego to it, and we've got to deal with that first. How much was present in your particular scenario?
Yeah, it was definitely there. And as I said, I don't need a steering drill. I race. I think I've won races, and I haven't done need to do a steering drill. And as soon as started working out that I hadn't been consciously turning a motorcycle, I was like, all right, shelve this ego. What can you get? Like, what else
Yeah.
haven't you been doing? I started having a lot of heavy self doubt on. I've just been bumbling around here, and I think there's a little bit of luck. I'm not a big crasher, never have been. So I assumed I was doing a lot of things correctly, and I would say
Yeah.
there was a lot of unconscious things that I was probably technically doing correct, but I had no choice over. It just was a little bit of how my style evolved on the track, and sorry, on the road. And I
Yeah.
think I was predominantly a small bike person. Guys had CBR thousands, and
Yeah.
all my mates on the road. I always chose the bike with less horsepower. I always chose a naked bike, or I always chose a slightly smaller bike. My RG 150 was a road bike first, and everyone had 250s. So I had to, for me to keep up with them on the road, you had to ride better in the turns. So there was obviously some learning that happened, but very little conscious awareness of what I was doing to make it to affect that.
Yeah, that's interesting because when I remember when I started, dirt racing, I went for the horsepower,
Mm,
and they were two-stroke days.
yeah,
I'm talking, early '80s, late '70s, early '80s kind of thing.
big smoke things.
Yeah, so I went out, I got to go and get a night, a YZ 465
Yeah, yeah.
two-stroke, which was just a brutal thing to ride. And I remember I had that, and I must have crashed it 200 times, like
Yeah.
some serious crashes. Like it's
Wow.
wonder I'm even walking today.
Yeah.
Big get-offs in the dirt, and fortunately it was in the dirt kind of thing. And
Mm,
then I went back to 250, and I became a better rider.
right.
It was really interesting. Like I went the wrong pathway, and then some of the riders I know now, or back in the day, who ended up being world class competitors, they started on 125s. They worked their way through the small up to the large, and I think that's definitely the better pathway, which I learned the hard way. But I was going to ask you about that because you said you started off on 250s, and then you went
Mm,
to 400,
yep.
class and things like that, and worked up to 1,000. I wonder how many people, because they don't know what they don't know, come unstuck because they just have this desire to get on those thousands and the modern superbikes. How much have you encountered that with students?
It's interestingly with the age, the time coming from
Yeah.
when S1000s didn't exist when we started coaching. I don't believe. When did the S1? When did the first S1000 come out?
I think the first year was 2010.
Right.
Memory.
So yeah, so I started coaching 2010. So there weren't many students on an S1000, right? But and that to me is what I link to severe electronic assistance. I know there were other bikes, right? I'm pretty sure there are
Yeah.
other bikes that had traction control and modes and la 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 la. But it seemed that the S1000s was so advanced in that electronic department. And when we started seeing, because we were coaching on Gixxer 750s, basically hydraulic, mandrolic, seeing the S1000s come in and seeing the ability to buy a bike that had stupid power back then for what they were, but was so tame on the road. If I say to you, oh, would you start riding on a ZX10, a 2005 ZX10? Most people go, oh, that was known for really being raucous, or an R1, the 98 carbureted R1, one of the coolest bikes ever, right?
Well, they call them
Uh,
all widow makers, you know.
Absolutely.
They're
Yeah.
killing people.
So they were heaps of performance, but it was all connected to that right wrist. And so,
Yeah.
whereas the S1000, you could watch people who didn't really have an understanding of what they're doing be faster than a coach riding a Gixxer 750 at 9 tenths.
Yeah, right.
And you could see the electronics helping them along. So that was really interesting and a real interesting experience to see. I suppose when I started racing, the guys who rode 600s and thousands back then, or the 750, was that sort of crossover
Yeah.
stuff. Uh, they were loose and fast, and crashes were big, and so you go to the track and you see someone really high side of 600, you go, oh, that looks painful. Kind of happy I'm on my little 250. There was like this natural pecking order that people would pay their dues. They'd start on 125 GP, or they'd start on a smaller bike and work their way up. Now you see more people getting big boomer bikes to start going to the track.
Yeah.
That is far more. And just going to Auckland yesterday, the Auckland market in New Zealand, there's a lot more bigger bikes. The track, it suits a larger horsepower machine as well, but there's a lot more bigger bikes that are turning up new to the track. So yeah, that's concerning, but the aids are there as well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think?
I well, I know in certainly when I started riding I think my first bike was like 1975 or something. I started in the mid 70s, right through for a long period of time. There were no electronics or anything. The bikes wobbled. They, we had skinny little tires. Like I look today and we got a 120 wide tire on the front. I think we had a 120 wide on the back. Like it was just completely different with very short travel suspension. Um, the only adjustments was you just got that little clicker and rotated the knob that compressed the spring. That was it. That was all there was. And every bike I had, when I got into 1000 Kawasaki, the Z1000 and
Yep, yep,
GSX 1100 was probably a bit of a shift. But all
yep,
the ones before that, man, they wobbled their head off. And I always remember that we had to, first of all, ride through the wobble, right?
yep,
You just accelerate through it, and eventually it would, because I don't know,
yep,
I don't think they understood trail and rake properly, and the frame flexing was different.
yep,
But the one thing that I think emerged, and maybe I got it wrong, but it just seems to be right to me in that is that throttle control was a real big deal. Even if you didn't know what you were doing, if you survived, I think you started to get a good feel for traction and get
right,
good throttle control. So now, like when I came to the school, and I think I did, half a dozen level fours, I always remember, and Steph would talk to me about it. She said, "Oh, what do you, hang on." She said, "Are you cracking on the throttle early, or is there something different about your bike?" But the point I was trying to make to her is it kind of felt all right to me because I could feel it. I could feel the traction through my ass, but my throttle control was always been quite smooth.
yep,
And I think that was an advantage that I brought to the table with the modern bike. But then I almost wonder if that's an inhibiting factor because this, rolling the throttle on, like Dama talks about it with his HB4 race, it's got settings on there where you can set the traction control for a corner and give it 100% throttle mid corner. I'm going, holy shit, my brain wouldn't even let me do that.
mm,
So I think there are advantages from riding those old bikes in the past and what you brought to the table that came from riding those big bikes if you survived. But we didn't know what we were doing. No, seriously. It was
Yeah,
who had who had the most courage to ride through the wobble. But then the other one, we'd grind frames.
yeah,
The frame would grind, and I remember that when because I actually bought a 2010, a secondhand 2010 S1000 RR, and man, that was just such a nice bike. When I bought it, I went, that's cool. And I'd stick my foot out to feel the angle of the road because my brain was all built around frames rubbing and all that. We used to
yeah,
stick our foot out, and
yeah,
the outside of your toes would rub on
yeah,
the bitumen so you could feel where the bitumen was.
yeah.
Man, that's all changed. It's completely different. It's a whole different world.
And really interestingly, when I suppose, formally retired from racing, and I decided, I'm going to stop,
Yeah.
and sold the bike, and really went, okay, I'll have a bit of a break here. The next year, I bought a partially restored 1973 Kawasaki, and thought, okay, I'll do it
Ah,
up,
I've
and
seen it.
that
I know the
continued.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, wanted an old bike. Never had an old bike,
Yeah.
so didn't know what I was getting till I saw it. Went, oh, that looks cool. I'll grab that and build it up as a bit of a project. And now I don't ride it very often, but when I do take it out, it is really interesting because that was one of the first Kawasaki's with a disc brake. That's horrible. It's the worst disc brake I've ever used, and I've
Yeah. Yeah.
I've done everything I can to try and make the brake something that creates a slowing effect,
Yeah.
but it's like a 9 mil thick stainless frisbee that I'm sure is just a gyro. It just keeps the wheel spinning
There's
faster.
no holes in them either, are
No,
there?
oh, no holes, no solid
Yeah.
stainless steel, absolutely. And yeah, the brake pads are like this round puck thing that looks like a piece of cork, and a
Yeah.
piece of cork would probably be better. And all it does is squeal. The harder you pull the lever, the more it squeals. The rear drum is far superior. But the point that I'm making is when you ride that motorcycle, it's one of the triple two strokes, right? So it's a
Yeah.
350, a little one.
Yeah.
And they were known for being the good handling triple, out of all the Kawasaki triples. And yeah, it's got the big steering friction on the steering head bearing. It's got a
Oh
big
yeah,
plastic
I know the
knob.
one.
You just tighten the stack of washers and friction plates to have, um, you know, a more friction in your steering head bearings.
It's like a steering pepper, but it's not.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. If anything, yeah. Um, and yeah, standard rear shocks at the back, twin shock at the back. And if you do anything that is out of sorts with regards to throttle control, with regards to steering input, counter steer or not being relaxed, the bike really doesn't like it. So
Yeah.
when you do it, everything, when you be on point with riding technique, the bike rides actually quite well. And yeah, you can tell that the frame is designed to just operate within this tiny little
Yeah.
power and torque curve that it's got. And yeah, it's really rewarding when you get it right, but it's
Yeah.
quite a tiring thing to do. And yeah, it takes you back to what I can, someone riding one of those
Yeah.
and then being able to trade it in for a 750
Yeah.
um, the next week, which is what most people did by the sound of it. They bought the 350 and went, oh yeah, that's cool, and then traded it in for the 750.
Two stroke.
Yeah, you could see why they all wrote them off.
Yeah.
So no, pretty amazing that they did. The road those old bikes on those old tires, and competed on them. It's pretty impressive what those talented riders could do.
Yeah, Castrol 6 Hour, and they were riding some pretty crappy bikes compared to what we have today. Like
Oh,
they were just riding museum pieces,
yep,
like
yep.
literally. Um, yeah, no, but it's pretty cool. It's completely different today. What do you think is the difference in terms of, I don't know, the which direction a rider should take, because today they can buy these big bikes, and we've seen them. There was, one recently, a guy there, and I'm sure he hasn't ridden too many bikes, and he's got himself a Panigale V4R, that we saw down at Phillip Island. What's
Yeah.
your thoughts about, young riders today getting these bikes? Because the electronic aids definitely help, but I'm not sure that they're the complete answer.
Yeah, it's really it's not my natural. I tend to be more of a stripped down. bare bones person. I enjoy something that's simple, but my race bikes, I'd always go searching for more horsepower.
Right.
And it wasn't till you're blowing things up and breaking things that you realize stopping and turning was just as important. And every time you search for more power, the thing broke, and therefore you weren't competitive. A broken bike
Yeah.
doesn't go around the corner, right? So um, the technology space and the aero space, those two things are the only real things that are different to the 1973 bike that's in my garage, right? So everything else is the same. It's two wheels, suspension. It's interesting that the front suspension, telescopic forks are still that thing, and no one's really made a good go of something different.
Mm.
Referencing the Britain and things like that, where in the GS13 that I rode a couple of weeks ago, that sort of different style of front end is very it does ride differently. There's positives to it, and I remember seeing Guy Martin. Was it Guy Martin? He rode the Britain, and in his book he wrote about that. If someone learnt how to ride a motorcycle with a cantilever front end from the start, then it would be interesting to see how they would manage the cantilever front end in the racing scenario, as opposed to everyone else who rides a bike from the start as a
Yeah.
pure fork. So, yeah, technology is so cool, and and obviously it's curtailing. It's coming back in GP, right? They're reducing aero and trying to
Mm.
make the electronics simpler. I think there still is the absolute requirement to be able to fundamentally control a two-wheeled machine. And it's got to be cheaper and easier for you to do it on a more basic entry-level machine.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that you can ride a V4R for as long as you can ride a Ninja 400 or a well set up 600s are pretty physical now. So,
Mm.
and then there's the question, and I really like the interview you did with Mike Jones and talked about the difference between World Superbike, Supersport bikes and the Moto GP bikes. And correct me if I'm wrong, but he talked about what your frame rigidity, and
Yeah.
bike rigidity, and how specific 125 GP bike and 250 GP bike is, and getting used to being able to get the benefits of the rigidity and the setup
Mm.
compared to a road based machine, and those two different ladders of riding progression, and what you sort of brought up on, right? So yeah, it's interesting to see how many people can go from a world super sport to world super bike to then GP. Seems to be less than those who cut their teeth on a 125 GP or Moto 3
Yeah.
equivalent, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny is because you were chasing horsepower, which is pretty typical, I would say of most racers, riders. And then when I talked to Mike about it, particularly about the kind of thing they would talk about once they go out on the track and do some riding and testing, and then they'd come back into the garage, right, and talk to the team manager and whatever it is they do in that garage. And it was interesting because he said in the conversation it was all about what he was doing and how to make the bike handle better. It was never about power.
right.
It was
Yeah.
always, because there's only three things, isn't there? There's you can change the structure and geometry and the handling of the motorcycle. You can change the power of the motorcycle, and you can change what the rider's doing. And he put all his emphasis on the rider and the bike handling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which,
And I would say that's something that now that my racing was predominantly pre-CSS,
yeah,
once I became involved with the coaching structure as a student and as a coach, it became quite obvious. And that was one of the reasons I sort of stopped racing the bike that I was racing. I built a very different machine, a custom built bike essentially, in New Zealand. And where I ended up with it was with search power, got power, didn't need the power I got, was now chasing a geometry frame handling issue.
right.
And it became very apparent to me that I had come up with a really good concept, but I had gone the wrong way with frame selection. So I took my ZXR 400. Most people would put flat slide carbs, and in New Zealand we could enlarge them to 450cc and do a few other bits and pieces. And I actually grafted an ER 650 parallel twin motor into my ZXR 400. And so the performance was a massive jump with regard to torque and horsepower, but the way that it sat in the frame and the way that the frame handled that was very interesting once you started to push and try and get really, really good speed, aka at times out of it. So, and what I felt was the front and the back were doing two different things. Um, yeah, and it was going to be very hard to change that with what we had created. And I got one of the top level guys, a good friend of mine, Ashton Hughes, to ride it, and I kind of went, "This is what I think is happening." And he came in and went, "That's what it feels like." So it was a real head scratch to try and make
Yeah.
the thing handle the way we wanted it to handle, and it was pretty apparent to me that I'd made a decision flaw, which is used in an 80s frame,
Yeah,
and
right.
lumped a big lump of motor in it. I mean, the frame wasn't in my mind. I'd do it different if I did it again. So
There's
that's
so many variables in handling and bike design. I mean,
hmm,
it must be so complicated. You almost got to be a genius to work it out. I only got that recently, just talking suspension with Joe Salter.
yeah,
We
right, yeah,
put the
yeah,
bi-turbo suspension on the S1000.
yeah.
And holy shit, it opened up a whole world of, for me, a world of complexity.
Yeah,
You know,
and I'm completely uneducated in the suspension department. I would happily and did. I suppose that was something that, I probably can hang my hat on. I always went to the suspension guys and said, "This is what I feel. What do you recommend?" I never really thought of myself as someone who knew a lot about suspension. I still don't. Still put my hand up and say, "Go
yeah,
see a pro," because I know what I feel, but I don't know how to. I don't know the suspension well enough to be able to affect a massive change or searching a feeling. Go to the pros, man. It's a whole nother it's its own topic. It's almost exclusive to motorcycles
mm,
completely, isn't it?
mm.
It's just so happens you fit suspension to it, but
Well, that's why the riders go back, like the MotoGP riders and World Superbike, they go back to the garage and tell the mechanics and engineers, this is what I'm feeling. They got to work out how to fix it.
right.
That,
Yeah.
man, there's so many variables there. I don't think people realize, scary stuff. Um, oh, I know what it was. You mentioned quick steer, you unleashed the Chappy approach to steering, which is this now pressing the bar. You got to tell us about the quick steer because I still remember seeing that video. The bunch of us coaches, we sat there and we watched the video taken from your bike, and I'm pretty sure it was turn 10. You went into MG, come over Lukey Heights, you go into 10, and we all collectively gasped at how fast that bike went from vertical to full lean angle around 10. Like it scared the shit out of us. So, what's the story with your whole career of quick steering?
Wow. Yes, and it has been a career. Let's not beat around the bush there. Once I yeah was told, "Hey, you push on the bar to make the bike lean over." I kind of was like, "Really, really? I don't know." And then of course went out and tried it and was like, "Holy crap! Like it really does. It leans the bike over when you push on the bar."
Yeah,
And what I really liked about it was once you got the steering done, you could get back to the gas. And because I was on a little DXR 400, um, when you were chasing an SV 650, the bit that you always lost out on was drive out of the turn.
yeah,
You always struggled to do that. So as soon as the steering was done, I could basically get back to the gas, and I got very happy with getting back to the gas as quick as I could, which meant if I get the steering done lightning quick, then the gas is the next thing. So that's, and I've had a bit of a chat with a couple of people on this now because I'm starting to see it in different youth riders here in NZ that go through and sort of latch on to this. It's almost like, in my mind, a cause and effect. It's such an effective uh, reaction or feeling that you can snap the bike over and get back to the gas.
yeah,
Um, that it almost burns into your brain too well. And I think that's what happened with myself. And I changed my entire style of riding so that anywhere I changed the direction on the motorcycle, I didn't have a difference of rate. I had one rate, and that was slam it over
yeah,
and get back to the gas. So it didn't matter if it was turn one at Phillip Island, turn three at Phillip Island, turn 10 at Phillip Island. I made the bike get onto line as soon as humanly possible,
yeah,
and then get back to the gas. So, and it also worked in my mind, shockingly, in the rain a bit. So you heard
Oh, really?
when you race,
Just I got
when
to
I
hear.
race in the rain, because you don't use a lot of lean angle with it, right? And you don't load the front up a lot with it, right? So you can brake straight up and down, bend it over, and get back to the gas.
Yeah.
And so in the rain, you unload that front tire, which is normally where most people have issues, right? In the rain, tuck in the front, trailing the brake is hard to do. It's not as good. So yeah, I it worked for me, and I tend to be a far better rain rider than I was more competitive when it rained than when it was dry. So
Is
there
that
was a
just for the sake of people who are listening to this, like, because that's based on the idea that if you get the steering done quicker, like very quickly at the beginning, your maximum lean angle through the corner is lower than the person who steers a bit slower. Steer person
yeah,
slower, they have to actually go to a higher maximum lean angle at some point to make
yeah.
the
And normally that's later around the turn, right?
right.
So they're still leant over for longer,
Yeah.
and harder to get that drive on when you bent right over. And yeah,
Yeah, there's
so
some logic in that.
yeah. Well, I think it's true now why I made it work for myself and my style. But what it means is your turn points become very late.
Late. Yeah.
Yeah, too late. Um, and it works very. If you think about a plan, now that I know more about or understand more about each corner here, really should have its own plan. I was using one plan for every corner. And
Right.
that plan was smash it over and get back to the gas. Smash it over, get back to the gas. So, yeah, that video was really interesting. So that was towards the end of me trying to get rid of the Chappy steer, and I'd been working on an earlier turn point, slower steering rate. And the bit that I was, the unknown, the negative that I did not know was all this time I could make up coming into a turn, and all the feedback I could obtain by steering it slower. And I really didn't understand what front end feeling was because I never had time to feel it because I'd slam it over and get the gas on
Yeah.
and start moving
Which
away.
worked on the bikes you're riding and in the competition you're in.
Yeah, yeah. And the tracks that I liked, tight tracks that go from one turn to another turn. So switchbacks, absolutely. Like if I can get from the right hand side of the tire, left hand side of the tire before you can, I can get back to the gas.
Yeah.
And then normally if there's at Taupo, there's multiple switchbacks. Then you end up making some money in those turns. The longer sweepy turns, which are heavy Australia, it's nowhere near as effective or fast, right? So
Yeah, right.
yeah, so that video was really interesting, and it was me. I'd been working that trip on a early turn point slower steering rate, and I was out videoing my level fours, and I was like, oh, well, why don't I go and do like everyone tells me I steer, they can tell, they can sit on the sideline and they can tell it's me because they can see the bike steer a certain way.
Hmm.
Um, and so I thought, well, I'll do a lap and I'll press record and see what it looks like when I'm not riding. Because for me, it was a normal riding application. So yeah, I remember hitting record coming up over Lukey. I remember coming out of Hayshed, hitting record because you've got to touch the
Yep.
camera and coming up. And so that was the first steering input of a quick steering input. And I remember thinking to myself, tire's not hot, don't push on it too hard.
Yeah.
But when you guys went, I'm like, oh, that was me not pushing it very hard because didn't think I had a warm front tire. So where I got into it was 1 and 3, and 3 was my proud little steering moment.
Well, this is a stoner,
Stoner,
which is a
absolutely.
really high speed corner.
Yeah, yeah. And so I just drive to it flat and then just smash the bar and bend it over. And it was the first time I'd experienced steering a bike so quickly that the rear stepped.
Yeah, wow.
And I distinctly remember like bending it in and the rear being out and then starting to do this, like trying to come back in. And I was like, well, the only thing I've got is gas.
Yeah.
So sure enough, added gas and that brought the bike into line. And so that little piece is burnt in my mind of how, and that's what the tech says, right? You steer it fast enough,
Yeah.
the likelihood is you'll step the back. And then also, to get things to align, roll the gas in. So that was really, really interesting to experience and see from the video. But yeah, that was probably, hopefully, the end of the Chappy Smash
Happy
steer.
steer. Do you
Yeah.
like that knowledge of it? Like you've talked about it worked in the smaller bikes where you want to get online as quickly as possible so you can get back to the gas. How does that affect your coaching of people on smaller bikes now? Because that last trip we did to Eastern Creek, City Motorsport Park, you, and correct me if I'm wrong, had a couple of really fast riders and they're on Moto 3 style bikes, and you're on our stock BMW S1000 double Rs. How does this knowledge affect your coaching of those students? And what do you have to do to be able to keep up to someone around those tight corners who's on a smaller bike that's, going to hold a different line technically?
Yeah, well, and it's easy to say, oh, it worked for me on the smaller bikes, and I don't quite think that's accurate. The more I think about it now, is I made it work on the bikes that I rode, and I doubled down on the tracks that I enjoyed the most, which didn't have long sweeping turns. So I think it's totally not the fastest way around the racetrack now to slam it over. And with those little bikes, the amount of force that you put in and the amount of speed you scrub off doing that is counterproductive. So now, and it's been working with those smaller machines that can bend in. So, turn one Eastern Creek on a small machine, they're flat, right? So I learn more working with them about my own riding than often they do about theirs sometimes. Being able to do what you're talking about, so being able to follow them in. And I changed my style to be able to do it, and it's been really educational. So for me to be able to keep up with a person who's really quick on a small bike, I end up changing where I sit on the motorcycle, or I did. I moved from being quite far back, so I'm 6 foot, and so I'm used to being all the way back in most seats or most motorcycles, and I'm starting to move my body weight forward more and more and more. So, and what I'm finding is I'm more active on the front of the bike with regards to getting body weight over the front, and I'm able to get a lot more front end feel, and I'm doing a lot more steering adjustments, turning
Right.
in.
So is this about,
Following.
the ability of the bike to, yeah, because you're moving your weight forward changes the geometry of the bike. Is this about holding a line that you wouldn't normally hold?
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. So turn three, turn four, trying to, particularly when you're leading them, because if you are leading a person on an R3 or a Moto 3 bike, their wheelbase is so much different, tires so much different. So
Yeah.
their line is on those faster turns, they can go in earlier and hold a tighter line longer
Mm.
and heavily an angled spear and normally weight. I'm a big fella, most of these kids are not. So to give them an accurate depiction of what I'd expect them to run, I'm ending up adjusting my steering all the way through and blending throttle and steering all the way through, and I'm hooking as much as I can to make my bike as short as possible. The place I can't achieve the result is say turn two at Eastern Creek. So there's just a limit. I run out of lean angle and I shorten the bike as much as I can. But at the end of the day, that line will always be different for me than it will be for
Yeah.
those
Well, it
little
tightens at
guys.
the end too, which is you've got it all the front half of the corner, perfect line, you're stuffed on the back.
Totally agree. Yeah, and that's sort of what I feel. So, yeah, but it's been you never stop searching, right? Never stop searching for a way to be better. And it's cleaned up those longer, slower steering input turns for me.
Mhm.
Um, and the front end feel I have now by doing that is the best I've ever had. I've never had front end feel in that on a motorcycle like I do now, from a slower rate of steering and sampling what I'm doing with the front.
Yeah, that's
So I
interesting.
started running with those kids properly, which is really cool. Yeah, really really cool.
Yeah. You've got like heavily involved in the hire bike side of it too now. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so in New Zealand, the California Superbike School, that as it operates today, doesn't have a hire fleet. And I've been tied into track day providers with California Superbike School, and then just with my own sort of personal tie-in with the track day operators. And yeah, well, I saw a bit of a decline in people taking up track day riding, giving track day riding a go. Less track bikes would turn up, and there was racing as sort of a different sphere. I think you'll agree there. Like there's people who do track days and people who race are actually there are different individuals. There's plenty of racers who go to track days, but there just didn't seem to be gaggles of people turning up to try out track riding. And when I rode bikes on the road, most of your road bikes could be ridden on the track. They were CBR 600s or CBR 1000s. People would see them race on the weekend and then buy them on the shop floor on the Sunday or the Monday, right? So whereas nowadays there seems to be, particularly in New Zealand, there's a big mass surge in adventure bikes, and cruisers are a lot cooler now than they used to be. You've got a lot more options with modern cruisers, and I think there's less sporty general road bikes on the road. And there were just less people giving it a go. So it was I believe that one of the limiting factors was the machines they didn't want to take. Machines are not cheap nowadays. A road bike is not as achievable as it used to be, I suppose. And by the time okay, well, I've got an adventure tire, I've got an 80/20 tire on my GS 850 or whatever. Well, that's not really suitable for the track. And so was it something that could be filled? Could you provide something that people could go and ride? And I actually went to America to do some coaching with California Superbike School America, and we went to the Ridge Motorsport Park, which is up in Seattle, and they had a fleet of Ninja 250s. That's when the Ninja 250s had come out, the twins, the EX 250. And you could hire one for the day and track day it, and you could hire one to race as well. And I remember taking a photo. I've still got the photo of it, like all these green Ninjas set up. And I was like, that's a really cool concept. Like, that would really help people, try it and get into it. And it seemed to be really popular and yada, yada, yada. And I got home and thought about it. And yeah, it was kind of like, well, I know a couple of people have got them. So do we just buy a bike and buy a trailer and yeah, stuff it. Let's just do it. So bought two little 300s, Ninja 300s. And I don't know why, but I decided to name them. I named them Bonnie and Clyde. And yeah, and that was, and I bought them off a trusted, track day racer guy, and so I was happy with what the bike would be and reliability, and and all that kind of stuff. And I just sort of turned up with them. I was like, hey, would anyone want to give this a go? And as soon as I sort of announced I was doing it, I had people going, oh, that's a really good idea. Can I hire one? So it proved there was enough of a market to have a couple of bikes, and then once I sort of had probably 6 months of track days where a bike was hired every track day, then someone would be like, "Do you have more than two? Like, do you have, how many do you have? Because you can only ride one bike at once." And there'd be mates who want to, I've got a mate who's got a Harley. Well, I want to bring him along. So the fleet just started to grow, and now it's become quite a popular thing to be able to turn up. And there's a couple of different brackets, a couple of different markets. So, excuse me, you got the people who are scared or cautious about riding their own machines on the track.
Yeah.
People who don't have suitable bikes but have always wanted to give it a go. You got people who used to do it, used to have race bikes and track bikes, and they know what it costs to set up a track bike, put tires on it, la la la. And then you have people who want to turn up with their coffee in hand and go, well, which one's mine? Oh, that one. Okay. And ride and then take off home. And so, yeah, and I've only got smaller capacity machines as well. So that's just one. There's all those markets, and I've got 300s and a Ninja ZX4RR. So you could argue there are those markets with the bigger bikes as well.
That's David, isn't it?
David, yes, absolutely. So
I still remember I heard it. I started it at where were we?
Manfield.
Yeah, we're at Manfield, and I remember starting it and then drooling on myself. It was that little thing. That's a 4-cylinder 400
Screamer.
Yeah.
So that's a real. Obviously, because I raced the ZXR 400, as soon as I got whiff that Kawasaki was looking at bringing one out, I was knocking on their door here in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Is it coming here? Is it come? Like, make sure it comes here. And yeah, there was two that came to my local town, and I grabbed the second one. Named it David because David takes on Goliath, right? The little one goes out hunting the big bites, and it's a sweet little machine. So I've actually just got a set of K-Tech cartridges for it to go into the front. So we're gonna give the front a bit of support because it's probably the weakest part of the machine, I would say, is the front suspension. So once we get that adjustability put into him, it's gonna be fun.
That one bike, that one thing, right, is enough to entice me to fly over for a track day just to be able to ride that thing because I'm still thinking about it.
There's not many machines, and it's a really, really cool machine. They've done really well, and Yeah, it's we had someone jump on it. We had a bike breakdown on Saturday at the track day I was at. Poor fella, ended up with a pretty decent oil leak that was unfixable, and
Yeah.
he's kind of like, oh, I've come all this way, and would you hire me out one of your bikes for a session? I go, yeah, yeah. So we came up with a rate, and I said, which bike would you like, David? So jumped on the 400 came in, and you always it's to say it's like the ZX4 smile when they come in. They just
Yeah.
come in laughing. And yeah, he had to go back out. He had to have another session on it. He liked it too much, so we went back out in the afternoon. And there's something about it making a little bite sing that really puts a smile on your dial. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's got all the modern aids and
Well, it's
a
not
real
that.
good bike.
It's just not the level of what's the word? Seriousness of 1,000. You know what I mean? That's the way I would label it. I have more fun riding on the range on my 450 motard than I
Good,
actually do on the 1,000.
100%. Yeah,
Just brings a seriousness into it, and like, but we're here for fun. And we struck this the other day. There was myself, Chris, Mark, and yeah, all at the Superbike School with AD,
yep.
and we had to run in bikes for
Oh yeah,
Mega for these brand new S1000 double Rs. So we all went out in a group, and it's the most fun I've had for a long, long time on two bikes because the bikes are actually rev limited.
yep.
I think they're limited to 8 grand, and they do 199 kilometers an hour, and that is it. So you know what it'd be like at
Sounds
Phillip
good.
Island.
Yeah,
You're just
yeah, yeah.
holding that
Definitely.
thing flat, but it's not
Yeah,
so serious. Like whoever thought going around a corner 200 kilometers an hour felt slow? Like
yep,
it's weird, but
yep.
in fact, that's the way it was, and it was just that it was more fun than it was serious. And I get it. I get why the small bikes would be the same.
And it would be if you jumped on David next time you come over,
Yeah,
it would feel almost identical to that because the geometry is of a big bike. Rake and trail figures are really, really spot on.
yeah,
The braking system is essentially a ZX6 style system. It runs Gixxer pads, there's in Gixxer 600 pads out of Tokyo pad, Gixxer 600. So it basically stops and turns like a 600, and it does about 210, 220 flat out in top gear at 16,000 or 15.2 or whatever you want to call it. So that's what it would feel like. It feels like you're working that little S1000 to 8 grand. That's all you've got. And so if you want to go faster into a turn, you've got to hold it flat for longer. It feels exactly like that. And they're a bit lighter. So, and they
yeah.
turn really well. But yeah, so that feeling you get is yeah, you go hunting bikes on the brakes, right? So,
The pitch is working.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
with these small bikes, how much does that influence, or how much does that contribute to juniors getting involved? I mean, do you get young kids getting to try out? Because a junior would probably not be able to come to the superbike school here in Australia because it's, they're 1,000 cc bikes. Oh, no, except for the 310.
310. Yeah.
But generally speaking, you've got a fleet of bikes more that caters more to that market. Has that been
Yep.
something there's been an uptake of, or do you see a
Yeah,
connection?
definitely. So it was really popular for and smaller people as well. So I've had actually quite a large Asian and Indian market
Yeah,
because the seat height is low on the 300s.
yeah,
So yeah, you want to hire a bike. Well, if an S1000 feels quite tall, whereas the little 300s have a very low seat height. So smaller people suits, and then tying that into the kids, it's they are pretty much identical size, a little bit heavier than an R15, right? So it does mean that there's more ability for kids to come involved, which is great. That's the goal, man, is to try and get more young ones in because it seems harder and harder to do that.
yeah. We don't do it like I remember the Moto PG guys talking about how big it is in Spain. It's almost a national sport, and you look at the Spanish and Italian riders coming through at the highest levels. We just I don't think we're there yet, are we?
No, and New Zealand is really behind. It's only been this year that they've changed some rules with regards to age. So in New Zealand, you couldn't race until you're 13 years old on the road racing scene,
Yeah,
which is pretty late. I popped over to a QJC round and saw the QJC Cup on the R15s to sort of see how that runs. the systems, the procedures with regards to the mentoring and coaching for the practice days, and then how they raced and had their own race. I
Yeah.
had a grid just for them, phenomenal. And the bit that I was surprised at the most was the brotherhood, sisterhood, the family that it's like the kids are all playing rugby or soccer or
Yeah.
a sport. They all come in, they're all sort of high fiving. Oh, did you see me here? And they're all talking like pilots. Doing the we did this, and then you break me here, and that camaraderie that they're starting at such a young age
Yeah.
is why they love it and why the parents love their kids doing it and the growth and that bit you don't see when an individual turns up if dad does buy them or they are suitable so that's the bit that isn't here and yeah the mini stuff in Spain is phenomenal, right? They're all on
Yeah.
tiny bikes. And it sounds like Australia, the Avali stuff is going really well and it's become very popular.
Yeah,
I
it's
haven't
getting a high profile with mini moto stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so I haven't been to any Australian Avali events, but I've heard it's really, really popular over there, and it's creating a whole nother opportunity and it's size and weight, right? Like a bike is big and heavy and has a clutch, and it's quite hard it's a new skill. You can get in a go kart, right, and you got go stop. So
Right.
a 6 or 7 year old kid can do that. As soon as you add gears and brakes, it's a whole new. We all remember. Well, we remembered learning how to drive a manual car.
Yeah.
And that was most of us would have the first time we drove, we would have
Yeah.
stalled it 3 or 4 times in the car park, nervous, mum and dad yelling at you for doing it wrong, la 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 la. And we were 15, 16, right, when we were learning that. And you imagine putting a 6 or 7 year old into that style of learning. It's daunting, it's scary. And I've had that with my son, trying to get him to learn how to ride a clutch, because that's the next step for him. So yeah, the Spain model, the automatic two-wheeled model, I think is the way forward. And shock horror, that's the next step for us. So
Yeah.
we'll start something here. So,
You'll have to hire a few.
well, yeah,
No.
yeah. It's a space that I believe in enough that
Mm.
I've ordered 6 mini bikes that are 5 of them are automatic, one of them is manual for
Yeah.
7-year-olds, and we're
Yeah.
going to start an academy up over here to really get into it. So see if there are enough. There's so much dirt biking over here because of the rural culture, and it's very very popular, which is phenomenal. But there are some parents who don't want their kids on dirt bikes anymore.
Yeah.
For different reasons. And then there isn't a space that enables kids to get into the road scene. So our 150 and 300 scene here is dribs and drabs getting into, and it looks like Australia is far superior. You've got a lot more kids coming through, and it's because you've got these feeding systems, right?
Yeah.
That are a must, and obviously you've modelled, or Australia's modelled them off the rest of the world, and it's amazing. That's where it needs to be.
Well, mate, cool chatting to you. Where do people go to find out information about, particularly the hire bike business that you're running these days over in New Zealand?
So I'm just on social media. I'm just on Facebook and Instagram under Total Track Bike Hire. So yeah, jump on board, have a bit of a look see. We'll have to formulate into a website at some point. The service is a hire bike service, and it can be used over multiple different track days and training environments. So that's why it's been quite hard for us to wrap into a website. You kind of need a book into the program that you want to do, and then let us know that you want to hire a machine there, and we'll do our best to get a machine to you. We are at events as a bit of a stable. Some of the events are always there, and others that we provide your machine if there's demand there too. So that's the easiest way to get in contact with us for the Total Track
Cool.
Bike Hire. We do
Um,
operate in Hannon Downs, Taupo, and Manfield in New Zealand. We've got sort of a northern branch and a central southern branch that try and covers those racetracks. People to give it a go.
awesome. One last question for you. What's next for Neil Chappy Chappell?
Next,
Work on
yeah.
this hire bike?
What's that? Sorry.
Yeah, so you're going to do the hire bike. You've retired from racing. What else?
Yeah. The R word's terrible, isn't it? Yeah. I just now I'm funneling all my race anger into my 9-year-old son Mark. So it's really really awesome to get involved in that space, and the mini GP space here is where I'm now going to dive right into. And a lot of that is for my son to be able to have a bit of a go at being able to get into road racing at the right age with some correct education. So I want him to be safe, and if he's still enjoying it, then that's awesome. And yeah, I'd love to be able to find more Kiwi kids that want to get into road racing in the future, and whether that's get them to Australia or get them to the rest of the world, or just even get them into a sport that didn't exist before. That's my next big thing. So we're hoping to get that up and running for summer,
Yeah.
and do as much coaching as I can and spend time with the family. So as an ex-military guy and a person who worked in EMS, I have put my family second for a long time. So it's really cool to focus on the things I love, which is bikes,
Yeah.
and my family too, and try and hang out with them
That's
a bit
awesome.
more. So
Well, we
that's
get to see you more too. Like I've seen you more in the last 2 years, 18 months than we have previously
yeah,
in the same
yeah.
time period.
So don't I want that to continue as much as possible. So every time I double down into this sphere, the motorcycle fraternity gives back so much more than everything else I've done.
Yeah.
It's really really cool. Don't get me wrong, I miss my military mates and miss some of the EMS stuff I did, and you always will, right?
Yeah.
But this space seems to be the one that's opening more doors for me, and I'm really enjoying being in. So I just gonna jump head first right into it.
Well, mate, thanks for sharing your story, and we're going to see you more in future podcasts.
Can't wait.